UFOs are everywhere. That's right. UFOs, unidentified file objects, are hiding in files in your cloud apps and storage. UFOs can contain malware that exfiltrates data or deploys ransomware. 70% of UFOs in files can't be detected or prevented by traditional scanning solutions like antivirus and sandboxing. That's where Vatiro comes in. Vatiro prevents UFOs before they hitch a ride in on files in the cloud, without detection and without slowing down business. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Vatiro. That's VOTIRO. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Keith Hoodlet about DevSecOps Essentials and why you should read the DevOps Handbook. Plus, he launched this very podcast 5 years ago with episode 0 in January 2018. Thank you, Keith. We owe you quite a bit. And I am your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella and Akira Brand, and it's just about time for the news. And we go straight to the news because we don't have any announcements to kick the year off with. So why don't we talk about some things that have been happening? I mentioned in the last segment with Keith, metrics always catch my eye. And here's something from Segment/Twilio. And we also just talked with Javan Singh about threat modeling and the work he had done at Twilio and Segment. And I thought this was pretty neat and a good way to tie into the maturity conversation and the essentials conversation we just had with Keith, because this is about a security product or building a product that serves a security capability within an organization, whether it is the CI/CD solution or that Keith was describing, or in this case, authentication for internal authentication or service-to-service authentication. And just real quick, before getting into the specifics of the metrics, the article just talks about two broad aspects of it. Health metrics in the sense of just how good, how operable is the service that we've created. But the other part is more of the aspects of product metrics. You know, why should we invest in this? What is our persona? Putting on a hat that gets pounding in the background. Sorry. So let me just pause there for the introduction while John or Akira have to save me while I go.
I'll talk while you go
quick.
in. You got to make sure when you put those bodies underneath the floor, Mike, that they don't start knocking on things. And another add-on to that article, Leif Dreisler, we actually had on the podcast, I believe it was April 2021. So glad to see that he's still doing awesome stuff at Segment and Twilio is taking advantage of it. But yeah, it's the one thing which I liked out of this piece. I'm curious to see where Akira's head goes here. But the one thing, it's partially me being the visual guy, partially really the way I think, is there's a spreadsheet in here, the beginning of a spreadsheet. Of like, okay, not just, some of the standard security stuff we think about of like, which applications or what's their vulnerabilities or, what's their CVSS score, all that type of thing. But looking at a list of services on the, that'd be the vertical axis. And then across the top, they've got health metrics, product metrics. I'd like to see in their security metrics and then notes about it, right? So it's like, don't just look at that service from a single dimension, but actually think about it sort of, how do you look at this from a health point of view? How do you look at it from a product point of view? Is it up in, is it earning or revenue or doing what it's supposed to be doing? And then how do you know if it's secure or not? So I like that idea of looking at that thing from multiple different angles.
Personally, I also liked how they talked about ironically, and I almost said it's all at its most basic is just planning, right? And knowing what you're responsible for, current state, and what the metrics program looks like, and how that's actually going to take a couple weeks. I feel like sometimes people just jump in, and they don't actually have a plan. Like sometimes a company will be like, oh, like what DAST should I buy? And you're like, well, why do you want to buy a DAST, or why do you want to buy a SAST? What goals do you actually have here? I actually was talking
Excellent
to some
questions.
security professionals the other day, and they were like, well, how would you roll out a DAST tool? And I was like, well, I'm not going to shove it in a CI/CD right away. I'm going to actually figure out what our program goals are here. So I thought that was pretty wise.
Perfect.
Yes, I love that. My go-to phrase of that is for you Spinal Tap fans describing the Druids. No one knows who they were or what they were doing. So, Kira, you just described having actually a plan in place. So we figure out why are we adding this DAST? And the other phrase that's fun from this is that they use the phrase drinking our own champagne rather than eating our own dog food, which is a phrase I first heard from Microsoft land as well back in the 90s. But John, you're a visual learner, you said, and I pulled in another blog post about machine learning 101, image classification attacks. Now, this doesn't actually cover a new type of attack or a new type of research, but I thought it was actually a really fun way to create a blog post because it was basically some code that you could launch a Jupyter notebook and actually it's a choose your own adventure in a way. It's an interactive blog post. So I don't know if you actually went and challenged some stop sign analysis here with alternate images. Had a chance to play with it yet, but this looked fun.
So yeah, this was fun. I haven't got a chance to dig down into the article, or excuse me, into the Python notebook. It's interesting for me when I first bring up an article like this, right? Because with the various JavaScript blockers I have, all as I see is like this box in the middle of the window, and I'm like, what's there? And it has the URL, and I'm like, oh, they're doing an IPython file from GitHub. That's a neat way to sort of bring, exactly as you're saying, Mike, bring an article in here. I like what they're doing. I haven't had a chance to play with it. I mean, we've talked about this a few times this year about how do you, and it's going to become more and more because now we're seeing it's not just the interesting thing about taking a step back for a second. The interesting thing about doing posts like this around image and image manipulation or image recognition is something which, again, it's visual and it's something that's easy for people to see and understand sort of visually. But a lot of these same type of algorithms are being used or can be used to do pattern discovery and recognition or code creation on the software development side of things. So while I think it's useful because, like you were saying, stop sign, that might be a little harder. It might be a little easier for most of us. In most parts around the world, we have some sort of stop sign or, go left, turn, whatever. But that's easier and more easier for us to recognize when that's being recognized or not, or being generated, versus is the code we're looking at, is the code that's being scanned with like a DAST or SAS, as you were just saying, Akira, or being created, if we're going to look at like Copilot. We don't always know if that's right or not, but I think with the visuals, it's a little bit easier. So I think that's really neat.
Yeah, I wonder what kind of... Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, please.
I was going to say, I wonder what kind of technology will come out of this. Like, just as a starting point, right? Like, things like machine learning and AI and all this kind of buzz around ChatGPT, things of this nature. It's kind of like... It's kind of rudimentary, but it's going to be really fascinating to see in the next 3 to 5 years where this technology takes us, which is personally something that I'm really interested to see up in 2023 and the security implications of that too.
Maybe I'm going to let's pick up that thread and tie into another article I had here about the open source software security foundation, talking about a mobilization plan. Now, this is something that actually, Akira, John and I had covered earlier this summer. And the reason I'm brought this in now is just kind of thinking as a look towards 2023. We're starting a fresh new year. And there is the idea of, you mentioned like Copilot or code generation. I do love the idea of refactoring and other ways of improving code, but humans aren't necessarily going to do that. And this article is kind of just pointing out where the OpenSSF is investing humans and effort into securing the open source ecosystem. And they had just a list of critical projects, as well as this Proximo effort, which is also just rewriting. So there's some refactoring there, some foundational capabilities into memory safe languages. So it's more of this is our think piece, at least I brought in. So I don't know, Kira, if this kind of ties into some of your thinking or what critical projects might look like in open source, or if what might appeal to you in this.
Yeah, sure. So actually, this ties into something that I was looking into, not necessarily from a security perspective, but from an open source perspective. There is an app that is called Muse Score, and it is a essentially an app to let you compose music virtually, so like for like actual printed sheet music, and it's open source, right? And I was watching this video on how it's really challenging sometimes for open source maintainers to have not a ton of technical debt just by the very nature of how open source is built, right? So mostly volunteer. People maybe come in, fix one issue, maybe two issues, something along those lines, and then the maintainers are in charge, of course, of making sure that it's all merged, and then it all is functional. But that leads to a ton of technical debt. And I'm actually personally looking for an open source project to like practice my Appsec skills on. And I looked at this Muse score and I was like, oh wow, like they actually just did this huge refactor. They actually hired professional coders to come in that could dedicate full time hours to this, and it was just really fascinating to see like it inside of refactoring how you could also refactor for security. And I think that that would be one of the most valuable things for open source right now as technical debt is being paid off, is to also bring security into that. So that it's a very beginning rudimentary path for me, but I'm really personally excited to see like where this goes.
You picked a triple of words there, which sort of it's going to give me something to think about. And I can see why Mike's sniggering. We've had many conversations over the year about when do you refactor, what do you not do. The concept of refactoring for security, I'll have to think about that because usually when you refactor, there's a chance you're actually going to bring new issues into whatever it is you're refactoring. Refactor for security. I can see.
Well,
I
like
can
how they
see.
talk about. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I can see that. I can see values in it in different ways, and please tell me why I'm wrong here in a second. I think I might be missing something, but at the same time, I can see reasons why I'd want to go through and refactor to make something more secure. But at the same time, it's like I'm taking a chance of breaking the cobwebs in the night. But what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just mentioning there's this one section in this white paper where they talk about like bringing that baseline secure software development education and certs to everybody involved in the process. And so I think that if they can, as people are refactoring, if they can do things like input validation or output encoding, things of this nature, that's kind of what I mean. I don't know if that
Yeah,
kind
that's
of describes. Yeah.
there's definitely that's a good setup for our next because we're running into perhaps a naming things or shared language about when we say refactoring versus new code versus training. And I think what you were describing with that small open source project that was appealing to you, Akira, was a small example of what the OpenSSF is trying to do for the broad open source ecosystem. They're spending several $1 million into should we do some pen testing or should we do some code reviews or some other type of artifact signing. So there's very many options besides just as we throw around the word refactoring into securing these open source projects. Also, since Keith brought it up, I will say for the first time in about 6 months, I'll mention Log4J just as an example here because we're talking about it. Everyone's going to be looking back 1 year later on Log4J. Before I fall asleep talking on this topic, just did want to point out a quote from the author of this article, who was asserting, I think it's pretty reasonable to say that if a third-party code review had been done on the Log4j code, probably could have caught this type of vulnerability because its JNDI was discussed in quite a bit in the years leading, Black Hat presentations. It had known hinkiness to it, to use a security term, and possibly could have found this type of issue and saved a lot of headache, or could have just introduced a secure default. Why not have JNDI turned off, since also a lot of people that were exposed to this never even were using it. And this goes into one of my wish lists for 2023 to have that hardening guides are an anti-pattern. And we should have secure defaults, and we need to call something this is the problem. I don't have a good name for an unhardening guide, a dehardening or weakening or softening or making things worse guide, possibly is what I'll land on. But that's going to be my 2023 resolution, to come up with a good name for that.
I like using secure by default, but it seems like that phrase rubs some people the wrong way. I don't know why. But yeah, I hear you.
So speaking of terminology and us trying to figure out what do we mean when we say refactoring or something else, we have two articles here. One, Akira, you were bringing in some SASE opinions or perspectives here, as I was bringing in some Peach, which is also an anagram for cheap. So it's a good thing that Wiz.io went with Peach for their acronym. But they were bringing in essentially a discussion framework for describing what cloud isolation looks like. And it really is, they're talking about hardening through privilege, encryption, authentication, connectivity, hygiene. And there you get the letters that spell out Peach. And it's not a meaty article, but I think if you just have it as a point of reference for some concepts, they're applicable to many software projects. They're not just something that is specific to the cloud. So I did want to highlight it from that reason, just to get minds going. If you are a team of lower immaturity or trying to improve the maturity of some software projects, these are some principles or ways of thinking about the approach.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, actually, on my SASE article, the main takeaway is that there is a nonprofit called MEF, and they are actually seeking to define a standard for SASE. And it's funny you talk about terminology. From their prospectus, they say the standard aligns stakeholders on common terminology and service attributes in buying, selling, and delivering SASE services. And the main reason this exists is because when SASE came out, I believe it was a few years ago, companies started being quote unquote SASE compliant or have quote unquote SASE products, but no one really knows what SASE means. So this is exactly, I mean, we know what it means in like an abstract sense, but there's no standardization of these terminologies. So that's what MEF's mission is so that they can standardize this and have a little more integrity inside of the industry.
Yeah, and I think for me, I would mostly just describe that as moving trust and authentication and authorization decisions to the application layer. Maybe I'm trying to say move it from the network and IP-based protections up to the web app layer, for example. But that's how I would describe it. And we could get a second opinion on this, John, or we could also talk about two developers who are approaching the same problem. You had a different article that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'll take a swing at both of those. On the SASE is interesting to me from the point of view of, I don't know if some of our other Security Weekly hosts are listening. This might cause a bit of a reaction similar to when Akira mentioned refactoring a few minutes ago to me. Is what's the difference between SASE versus zero trust? And sorry for our listeners too, if there's folks out there that really sort of throws you a curve. I think the two are related in a few ways. I think SASE might be a little more of, at least to me, SASE is a little more of an actual implementation of something versus a hand waving in an architecture. But yeah, it'd be nice to see those get standardized and have a little less less phrases generically floating around out there, having a little more of a solid meaning. But moving on, the article which you're talking about, Mike, is actually pretty neat. So this is from Laravel News, which I believe Laravel is one of the other Drupal-like things, but if I remember right, I probably should check that out. But anyways, what they did is they wrote an article here talking about two developers looking at the same problem. And the idea is like, the article goes through and talks about, hey, we want to create some code for doing a password generator. And the first guy who takes a spin at it is sort of looking at it or thinking about it from a, I'll say UI point of view, not directly, right? But he's thinking about the overall, what's the experience for the end user? What does he need in there? How is it actually going to be put together, and what sort of holds that thing there? And then they give it to a second guy who's a little more of a classical, modern day classical software developer. And the first thing in his section is like the API. So, right, like how do you actually, someone who is, and you could say they've been trained to work in I think you could say a larger, modern, big tech shop, right? If you go to interview at those places, or like they have like a system interview question. They want you to see, start with the API and like actually start building out the whole thing. But I thought so that's the article itself, right? I don't care too much about the details in here. What was interesting to me actually was, for me to do it with either my coworkers or friends or any of our listeners, it's like, okay, I've got this thing I'm thinking about developing. How would I go about developing it versus, you, Akira, right? And there's no wrong way, but it's like take two humans who have different experiences and how they actually come and put that together. I think it's sort of a learning experience for both. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of this.
It's kind of like the value of pair programming,
Yeah.
right? Is getting those two different opinions. I also, John, I love how you use the phrase classically trained programmer or something like that. That's amazing.
Because
I don't even know what that means, but I love it.
I think honestly, it's probably where some of the things I've been looking at the last few years, because I don't think it is classically, right? I mean, classical software development probably comes down to when you've gone through school or you've learned how to develop software. If it was 10, 15 years ago, it'd be a waterfall method. Then it was more agile. And like I said, now if you want to work at, I don't know, pick a name, Meta, and you go look around YouTube, you'll find people with not a single, but with like tens or 20s or hundreds of videos of like, how do you take that that system design interview question and actually break it out? And this is more design than coding, but it's you start before you can code, you have to start with design, right? An example that comes to my head is build Instagram. How do you do that? So for our listeners who aren't familiar with this, like think through, okay, well, how would you go about designing and building Instagram? And I don't mean the UI, right? It's like, okay, you're building something for scale. It has to be able to upload photos. It has to have that from all over the world. Then people have a timeline and they have to be able to see the new photos coming in your friend groups and your likes. And then you start breaking this whole thing down. So that's where, when I was thinking classic is probably completely the wrong phrase. You're right. But it is interesting. We'll think about the Beethoven and Mozart of software development.
That's what I was thinking, Amadeus, and the feedback given to a code review for Mozart would be too many variables.
Yes.
Too many variables.
So, yeah.
Oh my God.
Which one should I take out would be the rejoinder to that. But other things that have too many variables are those with variables that have cross-site scripting vulnerabilities in them. And too many bricks, Lego bricks. Akira, you had a fun, let's switch back to a couple quick vulns before we get into some tools discussion. What happened to poor Lego APIs?
Sure. So actually, Salt Labs wanted to do some analysis of API security, and they didn't necessarily want to analyze a traditional tech company. So what they did is they took Lego APIs and they analyzed them for security vulnerabilities. So the security researcher is named Shiran Yodev. He found that there was 3 things that the Lego API allowed for. The first one was to manipulate service users to gain complete control over their accounts. The second is to leak PII and other sensitive data stored internally by the service. And the third is to gain access to internal production data, which could have led to the full compromise of the company's internal servers. So this is no joke stuff, right? The thing that I really took away from it, though, is I was doing a little bit of research on API security and how not only is software eating the world, but APIs are eating all the software that's eating the world, right? It's like this meta thing going on. And what I'm finding is that people are developing APIs, they're releasing them very quickly, and they're not securing them as well potentially as they could be. Lego, of course, reacted to this report very well. They fixed things within a matter of days. But it was just interesting. A huge company could have released APIs that were this insecure, and that's I think something that is missing that I would want for 2023. Like that's a personal wish is like more training for software developers on API security, and also more ability for tools and whatnot to scan for API vulnerabilities. So that was the main takeaway for me. Is just figuring out.
It's interesting to say that because this kind of highlights to me a good example of an environment I think that Keith might be more familiar with. Mm-hmm. It is a great example to say, let's not look at just the tech behemoths that we're all familiar with. What are people building out there in APIs? And I do wonder, Lego is a big company, but how big is their engineering team? How big is their software team?
Right.
Probably not so big, probably under budgeted as well. So where would you do some investment to, for example, looking at just cross-site scripting and XML external entities vulns? These are classical vulns that we've seen that date back to Greco-Roman times. That it's just astonishing to see. I don't mean to mean that in a mean way, but in modern code, because we do have tools, we have patterns to be able to identify and prevent these. So I think this does point to you have a small team dedicated to building software, but they need some tools, they need some help to do so securely. John, I'm not sure if there's something you want to add there or tie in the vulnerability that caught your attention this week as well.
We always talk positive about the Greco-Roman approach to software development. No, I think this is interesting. I think you sort of covered that one pretty well from the point of view of, think about, again, we live in our little software development, software security bubble, but the majority of people out there that are doing this stuff day to day are, they're that small group. Lego doesn't make money they make some money off of that Mindstorms and stuff, but like they make money off of all those little plastic pieces they make. So yeah, we're running short on time. So while I'm looking through to click on things, what would I love to see for 2023 first? One is, or the thing I think, how can we there's a story I'm not putting in here, which is again about malware going into one of the, I can't remember which one, but NPM's one of those type of things. So I would love to see more security coming from, or more, let's say more control coming from the software repositories or the module repositories. I know we're going to talk about some other, I'll foreshadow a little bit, some other sort of software installation tools in here in a few minutes, but how do we make sure that the software which they are consuming or that we are consuming, not complete packages, not complete software, but little bits and pieces, how do we improve the security around those from either a validation and authorization point of view, authentication point of view, and then sort of how do we do this again as a curious thing, like, or most of these folks are open source. How do we, with an open source mindset, be able to secure those without expecting people to go and memorize OWASP top 10? It's a little more difficult than it sounds, unfortunately, and that's a big thing to swallow, but there's my hope. Here's some vulnerabilities for the vulnerability lovers in Samba, for the Samba lovers. So we found, or not we, I long since I've done this, but a group of folks found 4 vulnerabilities in Samba, particularly on the authentication side in Curb, Windows Curb, as well as actually all 4 in Windows Curb, around using R2-4HMAC. Probably not the best thing, but what's interesting about this to me, beside the 4 vulnerabilities being patched, and in some cases leading to elevation of privilege, is 2 of the vulns were originally found and patched in the Microsoft November Tuesday patch update, so about a month ago. And then Samba went, oh wait, that affects us too. And I thought it was an interesting thing about an open source tool that is so in lockstep with, I don't want to say mimicking or copying, but the tool that it's working with, right? So Samba, for those, I'm sure most know, but for those who don't, is a open source, start off as just purely file sharing, but added in authentication and allowing you to have an Active Directory domain controller without having the Windows server. But that means it has to be able to interact with Windows, right? So, but the interesting thing here is they are so well in lockstep that when a vulnerability is found in the parent product, that it's affecting the child too. So I thought is that a good thing or bad thing? Is it that, do you want to be that sort of accurate, or I don't know. I don't have an answer there.
Yes. Trying to figure out how to tie that into just how close do we want this to the protocol. But let's switch from you were focusing on Windows. I'm going to bring us back to Mac OS briefly, because one of the things I wanted to do this year, and this is more of talking out loud, how we do the show, is highlight more tools. Last year, John, you and I think it was episode 185, we did a DIY lab that I think was quite popular, and you covered several of your favorite tools. What does it look like to work in the cloud, work in containers, set up an environment just to be able to play with these things? So in the spirit of that, I wanted to highlight Homebrew Project, or the brew command, which is wonderful for Mac OS systems, and if you want to do it on Linux, although Linux has its own package managers. But brew is a little bit of a cheat as I'm talking about tools, because it's a tool of tools to be able to install many other open source command line tools and so on. But this is sort of, since it's January and we're starting things off, if you don't have Homebrew and the brew command on your system, it's a great way to download and easily manage other tools, and it will isolate them in its own directory structure. It's not going to clobber your current version of Python, or if you're still using Perl for some reason that's on your system. But so it's a great way as we start to talk about other tools to be able to get them quickly. And if you don't want to go through the configure, make, install steps, or possibly you have to configure then make. But hey, that's why I've been using Brew so long. I forget the order of operations. Kira, you've got some tools there as well.
Yeah. So quick context or a quick story. I'm mostly a self-taught developer, right? So I don't have really much formal education as far as I'm not classically trained, I guess, as the kids say these days. The way I learned was through community, right? I was a community member of a hackathon group called Mint Bean, and they were very active about 2-3 years ago during the pandemic, and we just ran weekly hackathons, and I learned so much just from being in that community, right? It's the only reason I think, honestly, it's the only reason I'm in tech now is because I was community taught, right? I wasn't self-taught, I was community taught, and I was able to get jobs and whatnot. So there is a similar community for InfoSec that I'm a moderator of, and this is definitely a shameless plug, but it is called We Hack Purple. It was originally started by Tanya Janka. She's still also very active in that as well. But we have classes that are free. We have webinars that are free. There's like huge message boards. You'll find CISOs in there. You'll find red teamers, blue teamers, pen testers. You'll find novices. You'll find amateurs. You'll find professionals. And the cool thing that is about it is that we're all united by this love of InfoSec, right? And I personally have seen a lot of people get mentorship through that community and further their career, maybe get their first job, and it's really inspiring to see. So as far as a tool goes, I think that other people can be one of the best tools that you can have, or one of the best resources you can have. So come join us. Again, it's wehackpurple.com. Would love to see you there.
And that's a great point too, that because when in our discussion with Keith, he was talking about DevSecOps essentials, and he does have a pyramid of tools, but as he was saying, people were at each level of the pyramid he was describing. So I think that really reinforces what you're highlighting, that community with We Hack Purple there, Kira.
Totally, thank you.
And John, you also are going, I think you're reading my mind with a tool of tools, perhaps.
One real quick one on We Hack Purple. I think what's really interesting about it is they've done an amazing job at bringing in that variety of levels. I mean, yeah, it's for those who don't know, Akira's not joking. Good collection of CISOs and senior management and architects and different folks over there to, any of these questions you have at different levels, or you want to dive deeper into, it works at different levels. So that's cool. But yes, like Mike, and we didn't collaborate on this. We both went with different sort of tool installers in a way. So recently I had to rebuild my desktop. Hard drive blew up. Didn't have my VMs backed up locally. It was quicker to rebuild them instead of download from the cloud. But I'm a Kali Linux user, and I think we might have talked about it in that previous episode. I don't remember. But when I was looking for the VM image this time for Kali, I found this other thing out there called Parrot Security, parrotsec.org. And it's similar, goal of let's have a VM image that has a whole bunch of different security tools on there. And I think it's got around over 600 tools. So I'm giving it a try right now. And it feels to me a little more organized. One of the things they're known for is it takes a little less system resources, a little better tuned. But so far, it feels it's nice to try different tools and see whether you like them or not. If I'm using it in 6 weeks, couldn't tell you. But as I'm doing some work now on some projects, that's sort of what I'm going in there and using the tools from there and isolating that from my desktop and things like that. So that's another thing for people to go and check out if you're looking for 600 tools to play with in one simple install.
No, an excellent plug. And yes, listeners, please do let us know. I picked Homebrew, quite a long-standing sort of older tool. Parrot, definitely newer, and Akira had the community resource, other tools for our toolbox. So give us some hints, send us some what you think we should cover, and we'll definitely like to highlight them throughout the year. And then since this is the beginning of the year, I did mention, we asked Keith what he's looking forward to in 2023. I mentioned that I'm looking forward to something like an unhardening guide being the in default secure for software. And Akira and John, you've both mentioned your hopes for 2023, but we'll give you a chance just to repeat that, or if you want to just emphasize something as we close out the show here. Akira, what would you like to see? What would you hope to see within Appsec in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, like I said a little bit earlier, I would like to see more emphasis on API security, more training on that, more understanding of it, and also more integration of tooling with actually being able to secure these APIs.
I'm just thinking. The one thing we didn't do here, Mike, because we're nerds, not the marketing people, is we don't have fancy names for what we're talking about. And I try to think of a fancy name for what I was talking about. This idea of it's not a hardening guide. It's not. I'll go with it here and I'll say emphasis. So I want to see an emphasis on improving the authority of packages on the software repos. How about that?
That's awesome. So we'll come December 2023, we'll check back and we'll see what the year delivered for us, as well as a nice list of tools that we've covered. So thank you so much to Akira. Thank you, John. Thank you to all of our listeners for joining us as we kick off yet another year. And of course, one final shout out to Keith Hoodlet for starting things off way back in January 2018. So with that said, please do subscribe. As always, hit that like button, check out the show notes. And speaking of music, classical or otherwise, check out Cybernate by Phaserland. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.